Hello and welcome to the Books on Asia podcast, sponsored by Stonebridge Press, publisher of fine books on Asia for over 30 years, located at www.stonebridge.com. And I'm your host, Amy Chavez. Today, we are talking with Baye McNeil, a writer, columnist, and activist who writes about diversity and inclusiveness for both the Japan Times and the Toyo Keizai Online, where he shares reflections on life and race, as well as profiling people of color who are reshaping Japan's cultural landscape. McNeil is an author of 2 previous books, Hi, My Name is Loco and I'm a Racist, and also Loco in Yokohama. Both books of which offer accounts of life as a visible minority in Japan. Today he's going to talk about his just-released book, Words by Baye, Art by Miki, Crafting a Life Together with Affection, Creativity, and Resilience. Okay, so you recently sent me a copy of your latest book, which is Words by Baye and Art by Miki. And when did this come out?
December 16th, 2024.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It seems like it was a lot of work.
Yeah, it was. I worked on it for maybe 5 years.
Yeah, the writing is phenomenal. You have a very strong voice, and I really like that about it. I think that's the key for writers is to, make sure they have a strong voice that can't be replicated. You are the voice for Black Americans, as well as, I guess, those in Japan, right? And you've spent a lot of time educating Japan. And you've had a big role to say in blackface in Japan, and you've definitely made some difference. So I wanted to start out with, what is it like being African American in Japan? And how do you think it differs from being any other minority? White American, Filipino, Vietnamese, Chinese, etc.
Well, as you know, I've been here for about 20 years. So my ideas about what it means or what's it like being an African American in Japan have evolved over the years. So primarily because I don't kind of think of myself as an African American anymore. I'm more of a global citizen. I know, just a human living in this planet. So once you step out of, seeing yourself as falling into that particular mindset, it just opens up all kinds of ideas and about identity and about self. And because my first book, it was written from that mindset of an African American living in Japan. And this new book is like, I'm here.
I'm dealing.
This is what I'm dealing with as a result of how other people perceive me, and how I can get through that. I can't speak for how other people of African descent from America are dealing with that. So it's hard for me to answer a question like, what's it like being an African American? Because my answer is going to be very different from another person's answers. We're going to respond to what's happening over here in different ways. For example, like this empty seat thing, which is what kind of triggered my writing from Jump Street. Ask another friend of mine, from an African American, so-called African American, what's his or her perception of it, and they'll say, I love more room. There's more space on the seat for me. Why should I complain about that, Toka? So
let me explain the empty seat on the train. This is a phenomena when a foreigner boards a train in Japan and they sit down, and they will find that while all of the other seats become filled with someone sitting on them, the seat next to them is usually left with no one sitting there. So the conclusion is that Japanese people don't want to sit next to a foreigner.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone encounters this particular phenomenon, but everybody's how people perceive it or how people interpret it is very different. And this is from among African Americans. So it's hard for me to answer that question because everybody's having a very different experience. As for Japanese perception of Blackness, I think that it differs from how they might perceive a Filipino or Vietnamese or Chinese, because Japanese are exposed to stereotypes that come out of America that inform them, that they allow to inform them about me. So when they see me, whatever perceptions they receive through American media or from other, countries' media.
Movies, especially, I think.
Especially movies, but not just movies. I mean, even things like Black Lives Matters, which is news. They see rioting going on in the States, and then they associate me with that rioting mentality. Black people are wild, black people are dangerous and violent, and whatever. So they, these type of associations get applied to me, and not just me, but the people from Senegal, the people from Angola. They can't look at you and say, "Oh, you're American." You're just black. And they connect blackness with whatever stimuli they've been given over the years. And that's case by case with Japanese. So I don't even want to generalize about Japanese people. This person has been exposed to different ideas than this person. This person has an African-American friend, or this person has a Senegalese friend who's given them information that's helped them process what they're seeing in a different way.
Well, I'm getting back to the empty seat on the train. There's one class of people you didn't mention, and that was me. And I don't like the empty seat on the train. And the reason is, again, I'm a woman too, so it's going to be different from a man's, perspective. But
exactly.
If there's an empty seat on the train, I guarantee that all the weird people on the train are going to come and sit next to me. And they're going to either practice their English or they're going to ask me all these questions.
Actually, the first story I wrote on my blog back in 2008, it was called An Empty Seat on a Crowded Train. And what you just described is exactly what happened in that story. The seat was empty, and then, this man boarded the train and saw the empty seat and then saw me beside it and raced to it. I said, "Oh, right. God, I know this type."
Yeah.
Yes, like you said, he wanted to practice his English, and he's, I tried to ignore him and study in my kanji. He's like, "Oh, this is a very difficult kanji." Blah, blah, blah. So yeah, he wanted to. And I think the kanji was like, this Chavez or something like that. I was like, really? Eating is a very difficult kanji?
Yeah, but at least they're trying to communicate, right? And even that itself does.
He was trying to communicate, but living here makes me more in tune with not just being a racial minority, but being, dealing with gender issues and stuff. It made me more aware of these types of issues as well. So.
Good. And do you know, in 1579, right? That's when the African samurai came, right? He came over with Jesuit missionaries. And because of his skin color, I hear that they thought he was sacred. But I don't know, there's not much known about him. And that's the thing.
There's not much known, yeah.
But he did become a samurai.
That's not even confirmed. There's actually a change.org petition against having this black character in a Japanese themed game. So yeah, it's pretty ugly. But anyway, as a result of that, a lot of people tried to dig, and they really couldn't confirm whether he was a samurai. Retainer was the word that was used in a lot of historical accounts. And is a retainer automatically a samurai? We don't know. There's other ways you can be a retainer without gaining samurai status. So it becomes this, when Commodore Perry came to Yokohama, he brought a minstrel troupe with him.
Oh, yeah.
And they performed for the Bakufu. So this was the real introduction of blackness to Japanese, not through actual black people, but through some racist trope that came out of the U.S. So their first introduction to black Americans or African Americans was the minstrel show, which was...
I wonder if they even understood it, though.
Well, actually, there were black people on the boat, too. So, but they were, workers. But the people who were doing the minstrel show were white.
And I liked how you had said that you wanted, that with your writing, you wanted to focus your energy on making sure that there were alternative and positive stories about Black people available here in Asia. And I was just wondering if you could give us an example of one or two of your best efforts that you think really hit home and accomplished what you had hoped they would.
It was one story I wrote for Japan Times. It was about a Black woman from New York and how she crashed a party, and it was a Japanese party, a party being held by Japanese people living in New York. And at that party, she met a guy Japanese guy. And at the time, she was studying Japanese, so just wanted to practice her Japanese with actual Japanese people. And she wound up making a connection with him, and he worked at a sushi restaurant in New York. And she went to the restaurant. So it was a great, like, kind of love story, like guy meets girl when Harry met Sally kind of thing, but with this, multicultural, theme to it. And it was a really beautiful story. And they wound up getting married and moving to Japan and, building a family and a business and a life over here. It was really, it's the kind of thing I wasn't seeing on Japanese television, rather. And that was one I was really super proud of because it went viral and, and not just in Japan, but everywhere.
Even the fact that it went viral is interesting, isn't it?
I think it was mostly because of her character, her personality. I was able to capture it, because she was real New York. She wasn't she was full on New York. Talking about crashing that fight, like, oh man, So and I kind of captured that because I'm very in tune with how New York think and feel and speak. Another story I did that went very well. One was about an architect from Mali. And at that time, China was doing a lot of, still, but at that time they had, maybe this amount of time, they were beginning to make investments in Africa. And they were investing in Mali and paying for students to go to China to study architecture. So he went from Mali to China to study architecture. They paid for his schooling, scholarship type of deal. But in order to study architecture in China, first he had to learn Chinese. So he had to spend a couple of years learning Chinese because teachers were all Chinese and they didn't speak any other languages. So he had to learn Chinese and then he had to study architecture in Chinese. This is around the time of Tiananmen Square.
Wow.
In the 80s, right? Early. So he was there at that time. Oh, this story was incredible. I had to write it in 2 parts for Japan Times because his story was so long and rich. And eventually he became the first black dean of a university in Japan.
Wow. Impressive.
And I wrote this 2-part story for Japan Times about him. And he's very famous now. If you Google him, but at the time he wasn't very well known. So I was one of the first ones to really write up his story.
So what's his name again?
Usubi Sako.
And you did give some ideas in your book on how Japan especially could get beyond some of its stereotypes of Black people. And you talked about how there was, for example, a Shakespeare play, Othello, and that rather than like copying the same exact story as it is told in, England or Europe or America, is that they could change some aspects of it to focus on their own culture.
They've actually already done it.
Did they do it? They must have listened to you.
No, it was done. When I wrote that story, it had already been done before.
So what other examples like that can you think of that, like for me to think of that would have taken a while, but once you consider it, it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
I think what needs to be set in place initially that blackface at best is problematic. Blackface is problematic because since Commodore Perry, it hasn't been. It hasn't been problematic until maybe the 80s. I think in the 80s was when there was the first instances of pushback against blackface in Japan. And this was Kalpisu. So Kalpisu's original labeling was a blackface character.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They had a blackface guy, top hat and tails and blackface. This was their label. This was their brand. And they changed the brand in the 80s because of complaints by people of African descent living in Japan. There was a big push against Kalpis changing their labeling, and they changed it. So this is the first time, I think, to my knowledge, that blackface was brought to their attention as truly problematic. But I think that needs to be in place first before their minds are going to be free to think about alternative storytelling. They need to first realize that the way they're telling stories is problematic. Mm-hmm. And once they do that, I think all kinds of ideas are going to come out of that. Mm-hmm. Such as, for example, when in 2018 when Hamada-san did the comedy sketch where they're kind of spoofing Eddie Murphy's 48 Hours. If the mindset of blackface is problematic had been in place at that time, maybe they would have gotten a biracial Japanese person to, to do something like that, or Hamada-san would have found some other alternative, creative. Because he's a very smart, very funny guy. I'm sure he would have come up with something, an alternative idea that was as creative and as funny as blackface. But the mindset was still in place that blackface is funny in Japan. That's how I feel about blackface in Japan. Not that it's racial. It's like they're determined to be racist. That's not the mindset at all. The mindset is that, blackface is funny. We think blackface is funny, and we don't see any problem with our style of humor. And now they do.
And do they still have that weird TV show where like some Japanese guy goes to like Africa and hangs out with a tribe, and it's like a comedy, and they talk, they laugh at the food and the customs. I just couldn't believe that when I first saw it.
I think there's a lot of tropes in Japanese television. I can't even watch Japanese television because always goes down these paths too often, where other cultures are fodder for comedy. And so I stopped watching Japanese television because it undermined my goodwill towards Japan. But I think as more of these types of issues come to light, Japanese are going to pay more attention. I mean, I've actually been invited to do lectures and seminars at different companies and different schools on this matter. So they are aware that this is something they need to be giving further thought to. And not just me, I see many people, and Japanese professors as well, giving lectures and dissertations on using culture as fodder for comedy is problematic.
Your book is a mix of serious issues, right, such as racism, microaggressions, and it's contrasted with a bit of fun and games, especially with your wife, which I really enjoyed that part of the book. I like Miki already. And you have these little vignettes about, sometimes it's an argument or sometimes it's just a very joyous moment. But I found myself on this roller coaster ride of emotions as I read through the book. As you dipped in and out of like rage and rapture and you also teach. And I think that's really key to your stories as well, because you know the pulse, right? You've got your finger on the pulse of what's happening and how Japanese people think, especially when they're young. And it gives you a chance to change that and to influence it. So I thought that was really an integral part of your writing, is that, you get these Japanese students and they'll say one thing or the other, and you'll be like, oh, well, but what if Naomi Osaka said this,
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of those times, those were adult students.
That's fine too. Yeah, even better.
Yeah. Since I've been in Japan, there's two things that occur here that bring me the most satisfaction. And one of them is being able to make a connection with a child that before they're exposed to the propaganda they're going to be exposed to over the course of their lives about foreigners. I like to show them that we are human and we're individuals. If I can make that connection before they get indoctrinated, then I feel like there's a chance that they might not develop. But propaganda is powerful. Because I work in the schools with the kids, and they are definitely learning that we are this way and they are that way, and that has not changed.
Right.
and as long as that's the case, then foreigners coming to Japan, non-Japanese coming to Japan, are going to have to deal with that obstacle.
Even now, there seems to be this trend to idolize Japan for everything. And it's like, wow. I mean, some of the stuff are just outright lies that you see, on social media. Yeah, so it's even tougher, right, to actually bring up some of the problems because people just don't believe you.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's one. The other one is when I'm able to actually reach an adult, which is much more difficult because they've already been, indoctrinated, fully indoctrinated. So when I'm able to reach through to an adult, and these are stories I've put in the book, when I was actually able to get through to an adult and they can say, wait a minute. And it's kind of sad when you see on their faces that they're questioning everything they've been taught. You know, all the indoctrination that they've been taught, you know, because they fully embrace it as truth the way, you know, you do when you trust your culture and you trust your society and you trust your media and you trust your, you know, your government. What they're telling you is the gospel truth. And then when it's finally brought to your attention that, wow, you know, I see it on their faces, and I don't know, I have a mixture of, well, yeah, I did it. And then I'm like, oh, that's kind of sad because I've had the same thing happen to me, and it wasn't a pleasurable experience, you know.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important for people to get out of their own country, you know, and to talk to other people. And when I came to Japan, I thought that America was the best country in the world. You know where I got that from?
Being an African American,
maybe not.
I didn't come here with that feeling.
Well, that's good. Actually, that's an advantage.
But once I got here, I realized that even though I didn't think of America as the best country in the world, I did have some strong feelings of American exceptionalism inside of me. Right. You know, because it's embedded in us as Americans from childhood that we are special and unique and wonderful in the world. And I had to get through that. Right. So I know how my students felt having to, you know, question the indoctrination they were exposed to.
Okay, let's talk about your other two books. Just give a brief summary of both of them.
Well, the first book was How My Name Is Loco and I'm a Racist. And I guess the best way to summarize that would be, it's kind of like touching on what we spoke about earlier, which is how once you're here, you start to realize things about yourself that you never would have learned about yourself if you had stayed home. And one of those things I learned about myself is that, in addition to my American exceptionalism, is that I also had some racist feelings about other groups, not just about white people, but about other groups, because, like I said, we're exposed to this indoctrination in America, and you develop these ideas about different groups, you know, and some of these ideas are really racist. And even though I've been the part of a group that's been a target of a lot of this stuff, you know, I was miseducated into thinking that it's okay to do that to other groups. And that's what my book was about. My book was about dealing with that, recognizing it and dealing with it, and helping other people recognize it. Because I was seeing it all around me. It wasn't like I only saw within myself. I was seeing it all around me in the non-Japanese community, the way people would, for example, the MDC. I thought of the MDC as a way, like a kind of litmus test, as you can see what kind of mindset you approach Japan with by your reaction to the MDC. So, for example, if you're like, oh, Japanese don't know any better, this is kind of condescending way to look at. What is the source of that condescension? You know, what makes you think that it's okay for Japanese to be this way when it wouldn't be okay for you or, you know, Westerners to be that way, or you should they're kind of a childlike race. So people kind of treat them like this childlike, pure, innocent race. I'm like, what kind of thinking is that? So I saw a lot of that going on around me. So I realized that maybe people need to have this conversation. So that first book was, in brief, a conversation about how we deal with the racism we find within ourselves. And the second book, Loco Yokohama, was kind of, it was just me trying to tell funny stories about living in Japan. Just me sharing some anecdotes about teaching in Japan and building relationships in Japan and trying to navigate through the trials and tribulations of being a conspicuous non-Japanese person in Japan.
Well, we are running out of time, so my last question is always, what are your favorite books on Japan? And they can be any books. They could be books that influenced you most. They could be books that you didn't think get enough attention. It could be books related to race. It could be anything, but something related to Japan. Well,
I would say the first book is definitely Shogun.
Oh, okay, yep.
James Clavell. And also Gaijin, his other book. Both of those books, these were I was in love with these books before I even came to Japan.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Baye.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Books on Asia podcast, produced and edited by Amy Chavez and Michael Palmer. Logo by Alex Kerr. Sponsored by Stonebridge Press, publisher of fine books on Asia for over 30 years. They can be found at www.stonebridge.com. And I'm your podcast host, Amy Chavez, author of Amy's Guide to Best Behavior in Japan and The Widow, the Priest, and the Octopus Hunter, Discovering a Lost Way of Life on a Secluded Japanese Island. For more interviews, book reviews, and other features, visit the Books on Asia website at booksonasia.net.